I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most irritating voice in true crime. Well, we are now dealing with part 2 to this whole issue of aggression and sadism, and also what is the biggest factor that led to the initiating of that aggression. Is it sadism or is it the pornography? Well, you might be quite surprised by the answer. Years of bullying turns him into a kind of psychological prisoner. He's alone, he's isolated, he's trapped in his own head. Also, he's had no outlet for the buildup of negative energy. He doesn't do any sport, right? And so a mean streak emerges. And these aren't my words, these are the words of, I think it's from a New York Times article where they basically say exactly those words. That he is bullied, right? He's bullied, and then at some point a mean streak emerges. Now, I'll put a link to that New York Times article in the description. Check it out. Meanwhile, do you think I'm speculating? When I talk about a mean streak emerging, do you think I'm speculating? Why do you think that mean streak emerges? And do you think that mean streak is a kind of reactionary aggression? Do you think it's a kind of everyday aggression, or do you think it's a kind of compensatory aggression? If you bullied and a mean streak emerges, what do you think is taking place? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed, please do. I actually see that let's just make sure. I see that currently, the last time I looked, there were actually quite a few people who had unsubscribed following the last video. It's quite interesting that that's the reaction to the amount of effort of that particular deep dive. Oh, so right now it's plus 2 subscribers. Not that long ago, I think it was minus 6. Anyway, that is what I'm dealing with on this side of things. You do this work, and it's not what people want to hear. It's certainly not popular. As I said earlier, it is actually quite, makes people uncomfortable. But that is what being an authentic voice and a cerebral voice in true crime is all about. If you value that, please hit the thanks button, leave a comment. I'm actually going to do a video, a bonus episode, your best questions and comments answered. So look out for that. All right, so let's get started. Classmates who remembered Mr. Human, who graduated 2 grades ahead of them, described him as a victim, albeit one with a mean streak, whose home life was difficult and school life was worse. He was a loner, they said, and a target. They describe him as having a mean streak. They describe him as a victim. A victim of what? His home life, yes. Why was his school life even worse? How was he a victim at school? Who were the perpetrators of that victim thing? But the point is that mean streak that emerged during high school literally equals the beginnings, the underpinnings of compensatory aggression. We're not just saying compensatory aggression, we're saying basically a mother load, a massive something that is going to take with him into his adulthood, and it's going to shackle him, but it's also going to be something that's going to kind of manifest in a very serious way onto other people and turn these other people into victims. We've dealt with this before, but just to reiterate, John Parisi said that he was everyone's punching bag, everyone's. He said that Mr. Human never really fell into cliques like jocks, nerds, or burnouts. What does that mean? Well, it means he wasn't just picked on by one group, say the jocks. He was picked on by literally everybody. That's a little bit like Van Gogh being kicked out of the village of Arles. It's a level of social death that very few of us experience. It's the nightmare, legitimately, where one can say that everyone who knows you hates you. Your peers, your society, everyone rejects you. How do you think you're going to feel about the world if you wake up into a world like that? And so Mr. Parisi goes on to say, he got picked on a lot. He would take it and walk away. I've seen him pushed to his limit. And this is also not just random one-on-one bullying, which is bad enough. It's orchestrated, it's organized, which is far worse. And what happens many years later? Well, there's this orchestration and organized targeting that he does. It's the mirror image across time. In 6th grade, a group of students had singled out the tall, awkward boy, this is according to the New York Times article, and tried to beat him up. After being stopped by a teacher, they tortured him verbally anyway. One outlet that could have helped him, as I say, was sport, but the fates decided that door to lived life, to lived experience, would be shut as well. Is that speculation? The article notes, Mr. Ewerman, unathletic and uncool, remained an outcast. What makes being an outcast and uncool so much worse is if, while you're regressing, while you're dying socially, you're in an environment on the doorstep to New York City, one of the greatest cities in the world, a sort of place of sparkling, towering possibilities. And each day you're watching it float away and eventually disappear into the distance. Meanwhile, while your hopes and dreams are disappearing, your peers are graduating, all smiles, they're going on to do their victory laps, they're going on to success as actors, and of course these are your torturers that are being basically rewarded by life, blessed by life, congratulated by their peers who also tortured you, and they're going on to live happily ever after. People like the Baldwins and Jerry Seinfeld and countless other big, medium, and smaller names. And so in this context where people are going on to have fairy tales and you are not, that is quite a bitter pill to swallow. And Billy Baldwin actually put up a post where he said, woke up this morning to learn that the Gilgo Beach serial killer suspect was my high school classmate. They were literally in the same class. He described him as an average guy, quiet, and a family man. And he described it also as mind-boggling. He didn't really talk much more about that. I guess there was more to say. But what this does is it makes the whole business of becoming a nothing. And that's essentially what happens when you're bullied to this level. You are reduced from a something to a nothing, a valid to an invalid. If you want to watch a movie that's about that, watch Gattaca. What does it feel like to be treated as a nobody, as to be treated as a second-class citizen compared to other people? What does it feel like? Well, when you're seeing someone else get preferential treatment, it makes the thing you're going through 1,000,000 times harder because you realize what you're missing. You realize what you could have had. And so, again, if you're in a universe where you can hear the dogs out there being walked and barking and having a rip-roaring time, it makes the fact of your own psychological incarceration even more crippling. It's a gnashing, teeth-grinding level of frustration. Of course, in dealing with compensatory aggression, Becker intuits precisely all of this. He writes the following: if deprived of the experience of the free and full functioning of his genitals or even the comfort of self-indulgent flatulation, or is he made to feel mean and small, low in self-esteem compared to those around him, especially to those around him? What do you think the answer is? Was he made to feel mean and small, low in self-esteem? Of course he was. I think we have something of a handle now on the high school side of the Holocaust, but what could be so difficult at home? Again, Becker provides some insight. Is he routinely punished for dirtying a tablecloth, for spilling on the floor, for losing a sock? the message he gets is that he is less valuable than these things, that things are truer than subjectivity, that order takes priority over spontaneity, that outsides and surfaces, such as our buildings, architecture, for example, architecture in other words, are more vital than insides and depths. Make it impossible or supremely difficult for him to reach out and warmly touch another human being or melt himself confidently into another's body. Relate to him so that he is always a psychological yard or two away from you. He cannot touch you or be touched by you emotionally, but instead penetrate him, who is already anxious and riddled with anxiety, with your own anxiety. We're talking about what's going on at home. Penetrate him with your own anxiety. Infect him with your own fear of life. Make him wary of newness. Make him cautious and afraid and tentative of new experiences. Show him a lack of warm relaxedness, or show him a lack of comfortable playfulness. Instead, reward him for orderliness, for taking care of clothing and gadgets, for holding back, for self-control, for his skill in manipulating mechanical objects, for not making technical mistakes in the use of figures and language. Do these things, Becker warns, and guess what happens? Guess what happens to a marvelously sensitive creature who needs self-esteem and the experiences of his powers as much as he needs bread? And guess what happens? You create Dr. Strangelove. Do you know about Dr. Strangelove? I'll put a link to that in the description as well. And so what you have is a recipe for the creation of what Becker refers to as the necrophile. But more clearly, I think he means the necrophilic character. A necrophilic character isn't born, it's made. And this is someone who is attracted to rigidity and control, to things, to rules and order, rather than people. Effectively, he prefers death over life. In The Birth and Death of Meaning, Becker writes, the message of this chilling transformation of a psychic cripple is at the same time the denouement of our brief sketch of the spectrum of aggression. The necrophile takes revenge on life for what it did to him. He allies with death over life. And so we are led to understand that the most terrible form of life negation is not something that man brings into the world from his heredity, through his genes, or from evolution. It is the result of something else. It's the result of what? Now, if you take what he said a bit further, the necrophile takes revenge on life for what it did to him, and he allies with death over life. Becker also has a nice little rap on the knuckles for those out there, and there are quite a few, that have been duped into thinking that serial killers are born the way they are. They're born with some sort of faulty wiring. That's what makes them different. They're born into the world with all of the psychological stuff in place, along with some sort of serial killer on button. And so we are led to understand that the most terrible form of life negation is not something that man brings into the world. In other words, it's not innate from his heredity or from evolution. Okay, so again, where does it come from?
Make an effort to answer now.
This terrible form of life negation flows out of life experiences and also the lack of life experiences, and that's exactly what bullying is. A traumatic life experience, but also one that deprives you of life experience. Becker adds, it's impossible to be exact about this process, but it goes something like this. If you continually repress his spontaneity, his natural appetite, his joy of self-discovery, and in the unfolding of his world, when you continually violate his self-protections, this is at home, through your manipulations and your standards, when you make his own body forbidden to him, and this is at school, you cripple that person in the psychological sense. In effect, you create a being who is so deprived, so walled up and pushed back on himself, so inept at reaching out, so short-circuited, whose nerve fibers are attracted to things hard, angular, and cold like the edifices of buildings like those you see in Manhattan, whose insides are such an empty echo chamber of denial that in order for this organism to sense in some massively clumsy way a sense of vital expansion, to be psychically healed, to begin to go on those walks somehow without existential anxiety, to flush away the deprivation, well, it would take nothing less than the destruction of the entire planet. And this serial killer is bringing about that destruction one by one bloodbath after another. I'm not going to take it further than that. We will conclude this analysis with part 3. And in part 3, we'll address the question raised in part 1. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this analysis again, please hit the thanks button, and I'll see you guys next time. Oh, and by the way, happy Father's Day.